A disguised millionaire walks into a small-town diner and orders a steak. The waitress brings his plate and secretly slips a note underneath it. 6 words. 6 words that stop him cold. She doesn't know the man in the flannel jacket built a $2 billion empire. He doesn't know she's carrying a business plan in her apron that's better than anything on his desk. But what neither of them knows yet is that the owner of this diner has been serving expired meat, stealing from his staff, and burying every complaint. And the woman who just risked her job to protect a stranger is about to become his next target. She has $340 to her name. He has the resources to change everything, but she's about to be given a choice that money can't answer. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, have you ever trusted a complete stranger with something that scared you? I'd love to hear that story. The reading chair still held the shape of her. 18 months, and Marcus Devereaux had not moved it, had not touched the stack of novels on the side table, spines cracked at the places Elena had dog-eared, had not opened the curtains she always insisted on opening because, she said, a person who hides from sunlight is a person practicing for the grave. The Atlanta penthouse was worth $11 million, and it felt like a mausoleum. Marcus stood at the window, coffee going cold in his hand, watching the city move without him. He was 58 years old. He had built Devereaux Capital from a 2-room office into a $2.3 billion private equity firm, and for the past 6 months, he had not signed a single piece of paper. His phone buzzed. Joel. Again. Meridian Group pulled their letter of intent, Joel said. No greeting. That's the 3rd one this quarter. People are talking. Marcus said nothing. I'm not asking you to be okay. I'm asking you to move. Elena would have... Don't. The line went still. Then Joel tried another angle, because Joel was nothing if not relentless. A chain of diners in South Georgia. Small acquisition, low stakes, just a man in a truck, looking at restaurants. Marcus almost said no. Then he looked at the reading chair and felt the silence press against his chest like a hand. Alone, he said. No team. Nobody knows who I am. The next morning, he dressed in a way he hadn't in 30 years. Worn flannel jacket, a faded Atlanta Braves cap Elena had bought him at a game in 2014. He rented an anonymous white pickup and drove south past Macon, past Tifton, through towns where the stoplights swung on cables and gas stations sold boiled peanuts from crock pots on the counter. Elena had loved these roads. He turned the radio up to drown out her voice. Calvary, Georgia. Population 612. He pulled into the gravel lot of Rosie's Grill at dusk, the sky going purple behind a water tower with the town's name in fading letters. The diner was small, cinder block and aluminum siding, a neon open sign with the O flickering. Inside, vinyl booths patched with duct tape, a ceiling fan wobbling on its axis, the smell of fryer grease and coffee that had been on the burner too long. He slid into a corner booth and opened a laminated menu sticky with fingerprints. A waitress approached. Slender, brown skin, dark eyes that held steady, a thin gold chain at her throat. Her hair was pulled back in a low bun, and a small sketchbook was tucked into her apron. She moved like someone who had been on her feet for a very long time. Evening, she said, warm but tired, the kind of tired that lives underneath warmth and never quite leaves. I'm Delia. What can I get you started with? He pointed to the most expensive thing on the menu, the 14-ounce ribeye, medium rare. Something flickered behind her eyes. There and gone. Coming right up, she said. She walked toward the kitchen, and halfway there she glanced back at him once. The ribeye arrived sizzling on a white oval plate with a sprig of wilted parsley doing its best. Delia set it down with a practiced hand. And then she did something strange. As she positioned the plate, her fingers slid a small folded piece of paper beneath the rim. Quickly, deliberately, the way someone passes a note when they know they're being watched. She said, "Enjoy your meal," and walked away. Marcus unfolded the paper. The handwriting was small, careful, pressed hard into the page. 6 words. Please don't eat the steak, trust me. He looked up. Delia was across the diner pouring coffee for an elderly man with large, trembling hands. She didn't glance back. She just kept working, as if she hadn't just risked something enormous on a stranger's willingness to listen. Marcus pushed the plate aside and waited. When Delia returned and saw the untouched steak, her shoulders dropped a quarter inch, relief, barely visible. "Why?" he asked. Quiet, not demanding. She glanced toward the kitchen, where a stocky man in a tucked polo stood watching the floor with the gaze of someone who believed he owned not just the building, but everyone in it. She looked back at Marcus. "The owner sources his meat from a discount wholesaler," she whispered. "Expired product. He redates the packaging." Her hands gripped the order pad tight. "I've reported it twice to the county health office. His brother-in-law sits on the county board. Nothing happened. Why not quit?" The weariness behind her eyes was the weariness of someone who has heard that question from people who have never chosen between groceries and an inhaler in the same week. "My son needs braces. My daughter has asthma. I make $11.50 an hour plus tips." She paused. "But I can't watch someone eat that and say nothing. Not when I know." She picked up the plate. As she lifted it, the sketchbook in her apron shifted, tilted, and fell open on the table. Marcus looked down. Kitchen layouts with measurements in the margins, workflow charts for a 4-person line, seasonal menu grids mapped to local farms, and on one page, in handwriting more careful than any business document that had crossed his desk in a decade, a financial projection for a farm-to-table cafe, startup costs, overhead, break-even timeline, supplier breakdowns. This wasn't a hobby. This was a blueprint for a restaurant, drawn by a woman making $11.50 an hour in a diner with expired meat in the walk-in. "Did you design all of this?" Delia snatched the sketchbook up, cheeks flushing, and tucked it into her apron like something shameful. "It's nothing. Just something I do on breaks. Keeps me sane." She walked away before he could respond. Marcus paid the full price of the steak he hadn't eaten, left a 30% tip, and drove to his motel. He sat on the bed and stared at the wall. She had risked her livelihood to protect a stranger. She carried a business plan in her apron that could hold its own in any boardroom he'd ever sat in, and she had called it nothing. He thought about Elena. What she would have said. He knew exactly, because Elena always said the same thing when she met someone whose courage outpaced their circumstances. "Pay attention, Marcus. This one matters." He stared at the ceiling. He wasn't going home tomorrow. Marcus walked into Rosie's at 8 the next morning. Same flannel, same faded cap, same corner booth. Delia approached with the coffee pot and paused. A half-second of surprise that he'd come back. "Morning. Coffee?" "Please." He wrapped both hands around the mug. "I should have introduced myself. I'm Marcus, retired restaurant consultant passing through." The lie came out smooth. He'd told bigger ones in boardrooms. Delia nodded but didn't sit. She was careful, the way people are careful when friendliness has cost them before. The morning was slow. 2 farmers at the counter, Mr. Loomis silent in his corner booth, the bookkeeper near the register with her laptop, not making eye contact with anyone. Marcus didn't push. He drank his coffee, and when Delia refilled his mug, he asked one question about her sourcing strategy. She answered in 2 sentences and moved on. At lunch, he asked about price points. Her voice shifted when she talked about food. Lower, steadier, more certain. She cited target margins for a 30-seat rural restaurant, and the numbers were within 2% of what Marcus's analysts would have projected. "Where'd you learn that?" "Library books, free courses online after the kids fall asleep." She said it the way someone mentions brushing their teeth. Unremarkable. Between midnight and 2 in the morning. By the afternoon lull, she told him about the scholarship. Johnson & Wales, culinary arts, full ride. She'd been 19, packed and ready, when her mother was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. She didn't tell it as tragedy. She told it as fact. "Mama needed someone. I was someone. So I came home. Home to Calvary, caretaker, waitress, wife, mother. Kevin left when Bree was 6 months old, just didn't come home one Tuesday. She didn't linger on him. She moved past Kevin the way she probably moved past him in life, quickly, because there were children to feed and a shift starting in an hour. Marcus listened without offering advice or sympathy. Delia seemed to recognize something in his silence, that it was not empty, but full. The quiet of a man who understood some stories don't need a response. They need a witness. Then a voice cracked across the diner like a whip. "Marsh!" Ray Eustace, stocky, ruddy-faced, polo tucked into belted khakis, a chunky gold-class ring twisting on his finger. "You getting paid to socialize, or you getting paid to run food to table 6? The whole diner heard it. That was the point. Mr. Loomis looked down at his coffee. The bookkeeper closed her laptop an inch. The farmers went still. Delia didn't flinch. "Yes, sir." She picked up a plate from the window and walked to table 6 with her back straight and her face composed. Not submissive, not defiant, contained. A woman who had learned how much of herself to show and how much to lock away. Marcus watched Ray settle behind the counter, satisfied, the ring going still. He recognized him. Not the man, the type. A small man in a small room who sustained his power through one mechanism, making sure everyone believed they had no other options. He finished his coffee, tucked a tip under the saucer, and walked to his truck. But he didn't drive to the motel. He drove slowly down Calvary's main street, past the boarded-up hardware store and the church with the handmade sign, and stopped in front of a vacant storefront with Good Bones and a for lease sign in the window. He looked at it for a long time. Marcus came back the next day, and the day after that. By the third morning, Delia had stopped being surprised to see him in the corner booth. She still didn't sit down, not while she was on the clock, not with Ray's eyes on the floor, but in the quiet stretches between rushes, she lingered a few seconds longer at his table. And somewhere in those small openings, the rest of her story came through. Kevin. She said the name without bitterness, the way you say the name of a storm that passed through years ago. They'd married young. He was charming in the way that only matters when you're 22 and too tired to look closely. Then Bree came, and the bills came, and Kevin stopped coming home. Bree was 6 months old. He moved to Savannah. Delia didn't chase him. "I couldn't afford to fall apart," she said. "Caleb was watching." She told him about her mother, the Alzheimer's, the slow erasure of a woman who had once recited poetry from memory. How Delia bathed her, fed her, held her hand in the hospice room and whispered, "It's okay, Mama. You can go." That was 2 years ago. The sketchbook, she admitted, was the only thing she'd kept for herself. Everything else, the scholarship, the career, the marriage, had been given up or taken. But the sketchbook was hers, worked on between midnight and 2 a.m. After the kids fell asleep, Marcus asked to see the financial model again. She hesitated, then slid the sketchbook across the table. He studied the projections in silence. Her break-even analysis was conservative. Her food cost ratios were tighter than most professionals would dare. She'd accounted for seasonality, supply chain disruption, the specific challenges of rural sourcing. "This is sound work," he said, "not flattery, fact." Delia looked at him like no one had ever said that to her before, because no one had. The front door jingled. A boy walked in, tall for his age, gangly, wearing off-brand sneakers so clean they almost glowed. He had Delia's dark eyes. "Hey, baby," Delia said, and her entire body changed. Shoulders dropped, voice softened. "Marcus, this is my son Caleb." Caleb shook Marcus's hand with the careful politeness of a boy who'd been taught that manners were armor. "Nice to meet you, sir." Marcus looked at the boy's clean sneakers, at Delia's cracked hands, at the sketchbook full of blueprints for a life she couldn't afford to build. Something tightened in his chest that he hadn't felt in 18 months. That evening, back at the motel, he called Joel. "Kill the diner deal. The place is rotten. Expired meat, wage theft, a county board cover-up." "You've been down there a week, Marcus. What are you actually doing?" "I need 3 more weeks." 3. "We have a board meeting in 12 days. What is happening?" Marcus looked out the motel window at the darkening Georgia sky. Something Elena would have understood. Joel didn't speak for a long time. 3 weeks, not a day more. Marcus hung up and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time since Elena died, he felt something other than absence. He didn't have a word for it yet, but it was there, faint, stubborn, alive. It happened on a Wednesday during the lunch rush. Delia was on her break. 15 minutes, unpaid, the only pause in a 9-hour shift. She was sitting across from Marcus in his corner booth, the sketchbook open between them. He'd asked about her seasonal menu rotation, and she was explaining the logic of it, tracing her finger across a hand-drawn grid of spring ingredients mapped to local farms. And for a few minutes, she wasn't a waitress in a diner with expired meat in the walk-in. She was someone with a vision, speaking it aloud for the first time to someone who actually understood it. She didn't see Ray coming. "Marsh!" The voice hit the room like a slap. Every head turned. Ray Eustace stood at the end of the counter, class ring twisting, face flushed the color of raw beef. "What the hell is this?" He walked toward her booth, each step heavy with performance. He wasn't angry. He was performing anger for an audience. "You sitting here playing pretend with your little coloring book while my customers wait?" Delia stood. "I'm on my break, Ray." "Break's over." He snatched the sketchbook off the table and held it up, flipping through the pages with exaggerated contempt. "What is this? Kitchen layouts, business plans." He laughed, loud, theatrical, designed to land on every ear in the room. "You think you're going to run a restaurant? You can barely run a table section. Dreamers don't last in the real world, Marsh. Workers do. So get back to work." He dropped the sketchbook on the table like it was trash. The diner was silent. Mr. Loomis stared at his coffee. The bookkeeper's eyes were fixed on her laptop screen. Marcus's hands rested flat on the table, very still. Delia picked up the sketchbook. She closed it. She tucked it into her apron, and she walked to table 6 without a word, her back straight, her face showing nothing. Not tears, not rage, not the heat that was climbing up the back of her neck and burning behind her eyes. Contained. Always contained. That afternoon, Ray cut her hours, 35 per week down to 18. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. Everyone in the diner understood what it meant. Punishment. That night, Delia sat at her kitchen table after the kids were asleep. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that presses in. She had a pencil and the back of a utility bill, and she was doing math. 18 hours at $11.50 was $207 a week before taxes. Rent was $680 a month. Caleb's after-school program, $45 a week. Bree's backup inhaler prescription, $38. Groceries, gas, the electric bill that was already a month behind. She crossed out Caleb's after-school program first, then her own meals. She could stretch the kids' food further if she skipped lunch and ate whatever was left at dinner. The inhaler she stared at for a long time. She couldn't cross that out. She couldn't. She put the pencil down and pressed her palms flat against the table, the way you press against something to keep from shaking. Later, much later, past midnight, Marcus drove past Rosie's on his way back from a gas station. Delia's car was still in the lot. The diner was dark. She was sitting behind the wheel, hands on the steering wheel, not driving, just breathing. 3 days later, Marcus walked into Rosie's for breakfast, and Delia wasn't there. A younger server, new, nervous, dropping silverware, brought his coffee. He asked about Delia casually, the way you ask about the weather. "Ray cut her hours," the girl said, not quite meeting his eyes. "She's only on lunches now, 3 days a week." She leaned in slightly. She picked up nights at the Dollar General over in Wiggum, 20 miles each way. Marcus set his coffee down. That afternoon he drove to Wiggum. He found the Dollar General on a 2-lane road between a shuttered feed store and a Baptist church. Through the window he could see Delia in a blue vest, stocking shelves, moving with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything, but slower now. The careful deliberation of someone running on fumes. He didn't go in. The next morning he went to Rosie's early, 6:15. The parking lot was empty except for Delia's car under a pine tree. She was asleep in the driver's seat, head tilted against the window, one hand curled around her phone with an alarm set for 6:30. Bree's inhaler sat on the dashboard. A child's blanket, small, purple, patterned with stars, was folded on the passenger seat. 15 minutes of sleep in a parking lot. That was what she had stolen for herself between shifts. Marcus didn't knock on the window. He waited until her alarm went off, watched her jolt awake, press her hands against her face, and walk into the diner like nothing was wrong. During her lunch shift, Marcus sat in his booth and watched her work, and he saw something he wouldn't have noticed if he hadn't been paying close attention. Two boys came in after school, Caleb and a skinny kid in oversized clothes with bright, nervous eyes. They slid into a booth. Caleb opened the menu. The other boy didn't. "Same thing as Caleb," the boy said when Delia came to take their order. He said it fast like he'd rehearsed it. Delia didn't write it down. Instead, she sat on the edge of the booth and pointed at the menu. "Deshawn, what's this word right here?" The boy's eyes went wide. He looked at Caleb, panicked. "Sound it out," Delia said. "Gentle, no rush. First part. Chick. Keep going. Chicken? Strips? That's it." She smiled at him. "You want those?" Deshawn nodded, grinning, embarrassed, proud all at once. She did this every time. Marcus learned later, from Caleb offhandedly, that she'd been teaching Deshawn to read for months, using the menu, never calling it a lesson, never telling a soul. After the boys left, Marcus caught Delia refilling the coffee station. He spoke carefully. "Delia, I've been around restaurants my whole career. You can't sustain 2 jobs and no sleep. Something's gonna give." She didn't look up. She finished filling the coffee filter, her cracked hands steady. "I've been sustaining things that should have broken me for 15 years. This is just Tuesday." She walked away, not cold, just done explaining herself. That evening, Marcus sat in his motel room and made a phone call, not to Joel, to a number he hadn't dialed in months, Devereaux Capital's head of legal. His voice was tight, urgent. "I need you to listen carefully. I'm going to tell you about a diner in South Georgia, and then I'm going to tell you what I need." What happened next would change everything. The letter arrived on a Monday. Delia found it in her mailbox after the evening shift, a crisp white envelope from a law office in Valdosta. She opened it at the kitchen table while Caleb did homework and Bree drew horses on the back of a grocery receipt. Ray Eustace was suing her for $50,000 in defamation. The letter claimed she had made false statements about the safety of Rosie's food and demanded she sign a retraction, an NDA affirming the food had always met safety standards. If she refused, the suit would proceed. $50,000. Delia had $340 in her savings account. "Mama?" Caleb looked up from his math worksheet. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, baby. Just a bill." She folded the letter and put it in the drawer beneath the dish towels next to Bree's backup inhaler and the utility bill she was 2 months behind on. Then she sat back down and helped Caleb with his fractions, and her voice didn't shake because she had decided a long time ago that her children would not watch her break. But later that night, after they were asleep, she sat at the table and read the letter again. The words blurred. Her chest felt tight, the way it does when the air in a room suddenly isn't enough. She pressed her palms flat against the table and breathed. She didn't call anyone. There was no one to call. The next day and the day after, Marcus watched things he wasn't meant to see. He overheard the cook mention that Delia had brought homemade soup for Mr. Loomis, whose wife Dorothy had just entered hospice, and told Ray she'd spilled a bowl to cover the cost. He learned from a church deacon that Delia had spent her one free evening redesigning the workflow for the annual fish fry, tripling the serving line's efficiency so they could feed twice as many families. She hadn't been asked. She just showed up with a sketch on a napkin and stayed until the layout was done. She never mentioned any of it. Marcus only knew because other people mentioned it the way you mention weather, like it was just something that happened, unremarkable, ordinary. Except it wasn't ordinary. It was Delia. He found her restocking napkins near the end of her shift and kept his voice low. "I heard about the lawsuit. Why not just sign? Make it go away." Delia didn't look up. She kept folding napkins, her cracked hands moving in precise squares. "If I say that food was safe and somebody's kid gets sick next month, that's on me." She said it the way she said everything, quiet, steady, final, not a speech, just a line she wouldn't cross. Marcus drove back to his motel that night and sat on the bed with his phone in his hand. He stared at the screen for a long time. Then he opened his contacts and started scrolling, past the names of investors and board members and people he hadn't spoken to in 18 months, looking for a number he hadn't needed until now. A plan was forming, and it was going to require more than 3 weeks. Ray delivered the news himself. He liked delivering bad news. It made him feel large. He caught Delia at the coffee station Monday morning, leaned against the counter so she couldn't step around him, and spoke loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "Friday," he said. "You sign the papers by Friday or you're done. And I don't just mean here, I mean everywhere. I know every restaurant owner in this county, and I'll make sure not one of them takes your call." Delia's hand tightened around the coffee filter. That was all she gave him. "Your choice," Ray said. He pushed off the counter and walked back to his office, class ring catching the light as he twisted it. The week blurred. Delia moved through it the way you move through deep water. Every step slower, every breath harder. She worked her shifts at Rosie's and her shifts at the Dollar General and slept in the spaces between, and the spaces kept getting smaller. On Wednesday evening, the church held its annual fish fry. Delia had promised to help, and Delia kept her promises. She reorganized the serving line, plated food for 3 hours, and when the last family left and the volunteers went home, Delia stayed. She stayed for 3 more hours, alone, scrubbing pans, mopping the fellowship hall, wrapping leftovers for the food pantry. No one asked her to. No one saw. At 11 o'clock that night, she drove to Mr. Loomis's house. Dorothy had died that afternoon. The hospice nurse called it at 3:17 p.m., and Mr. Loomis had been sitting alone ever since, in the chair beside the empty chair, because nobody came. Delia came. She sat beside him on the couch and held his large, trembling hand in silence. She stayed until his breathing slowed and he fell asleep. Then she pulled a blanket over him, locked the door behind her, and drove home. She did this after a double shift, with a lawsuit hanging over her head, with $340 in savings and a Friday deadline that would end everything. She told no one. 300 miles away, Marcus Devereaux was on the phone. "Joel, I need you to listen. I need the legal team, an agriculture inspector, and a conference table in a diner by Friday." He paused. "And I need you to trust me the way she trusted a stranger." Joel was quiet for a long time. "Friday," he said. "We'll be there." Thursday night. Delia set her alarm for 5 a.m. She laid out her uniform, the same apron, the same comfortable shoes, the thin gold chain her mother gave her. She checked on Caleb, asleep with a library book on his chest. She checked on Bree, whose box braids fanned across her pillow, the beads clicking softly when she turned. Then Delia sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and folded her hands in her lap. Tomorrow would be her last shift at Rosie's. She was almost sure of it. She set the alarm and closed her eyes. Friday morning. The sky was gray and heavy over Calvary, the kind of sky that can't decide whether to rain or just threaten. Delia pulled into the Rosie's parking lot at 6:15, same as always. But today the lot was fuller than it should have been for a Friday morning. She counted cars. Mr. Loomis's old sedan, a few regulars, and 3 vehicles she didn't recognize. A black SUV, a silver sedan with Fulton County plates, and a white state government car with an official seal on the door. Something tightened in her stomach. She walked inside anyway. The diner was warm, buzzing with a strange energy she couldn't name. Regulars in their usual spots, but sitting straighter, as if waiting for something. A few unfamiliar faces. A woman with a leather briefcase, a man in a state uniform she didn't recognize. She tied on her apron, picked up the coffee pot, and began her rounds. Whatever was coming, she'd meet it on her feet. The door opened at 7:15. Marcus walked in, but not the Marcus she knew. No flannel jacket, no faded Braves cap, no rented truck casual. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that fit him like it had been built on his body, a white shirt open at the collar, and those Italian leather shoes she'd never quite been able to place. His posture, the posture she'd noticed from the beginning, the one that didn't belong to a retired consultant, made sense now. He stood like a man who owned the room. Because he did own rooms. He had been owning rooms for 30 years. Beside him, a black man in a crisp, open-collared shirt, sharp-jawed with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and an energy like a coiled spring. Behind them, the woman with the briefcase and the man in the state uniform, whose badge read, Georgia Department of Agriculture. Delia froze. The coffee pot went still in her hand. Marcus walked toward her, not past her, toward her. He stopped 3 feet away and met her eyes, and when he spoke, he used her name. Not Sweetheart, not On, not Marsh. Delia. She didn't move. He turned to face the room. Every fork stopped. Every conversation died. My name is Marcus Devereaux, he said. His voice carried without effort. Clear, calm, the voice of a man who had addressed boardrooms and Senate committees and never needed to raise it. I'm the founder and managing partner of Devereaux Capital, a private equity firm based in Atlanta. I came to Calvary 3 weeks ago to evaluate this diner for a potential acquisition. He paused. Let the silence do its work. I found something I wasn't looking for. He turned to Ray, who stood behind the counter, class ring frozen mid-twist, his face cycling through confusion, then recognition, then something he had never felt in this room before. Mr. Eustace, Marcus said, I'd like to introduce you to the man who tested your meat, the woman who reviewed your payroll, and the inspector who is about to close your kitchen. Ray's mouth opened. Nothing came out, and for the first time in his life, the room did not belong to him. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He opened a folder on the table and began. First, independent lab results confirming bacterial contamination in meat samples from Rosie's walk-in cooler. Coliform levels 3 times the federal threshold. He let the silence hold. Second, supplier invoices from a discount wholesaler, cross-referenced with Rosie's receiving logs, proving a 14-month pattern of purchasing expired meat and redating the packaging. Third, payroll records. 3 years of them, provided by a bookkeeper whose professional habit had become the instrument of Ray's undoing. Systematic tip skimming, invented deductions, wage violations affecting every server on staff. The agriculture inspector, a tall man in a state uniform who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward and placed 2 documents on the counter in front of Ray, a cease and desist order and a notice of formal investigation by the Georgia Department of Agriculture. The attorney, the woman with the leather briefcase, spoke next. The defamation suit against Delia Marsh had been counter-filed. Devereaux Capital's legal team would be representing Ms. Marsh pro bono. She said it the way attorneys say things that are already decided. Not as a threat, but as a fact. Ray grabbed the counter. I'm calling the police. Nobody moved. Nobody reached for a phone on his behalf. The room that had always bent to his voice just didn't. Then Marcus turned to Delia. His voice changed. Not softer, exactly. Warmer. The voice of a man who had spent 3 weeks watching and had finally decided to speak. There are things you did that you thought no one saw, he said. I need you to hear them. He told her about the soup, how Mr. Loomis had mentioned in passing that Delia brought him homemade soup every week and told Ray she'd spilled a bowl to cover the cost. He told her about Deshawn, how Caleb had mentioned, offhandedly, that his mom had been teaching his friend to read using the diner menu, turning it into a game, never once making the boy feel small. And then Marcus pulled out a photograph, a still frame from the church's security camera. It showed Delia, alone in the fellowship hall at 10:47 p.m., mopping the floor. The next frame showed her car pulling up to Mr. Loomis's house at 11:08 p.m., the night Dorothy died. "You did all of that," Marcus said, "after a double shift with $340 in your bank account and a lawsuit over your head." He paused. "And you never told a single person." The diner was absolutely still. Delia's hands were shaking, her eyes were bright, and then they were full, and then tears were running down her face. Not the tears of someone who is sad, the tears of someone who has carried something alone for so long that the weight has become invisible. And then suddenly, without warning, someone sees it, someone names it, and the relief is so enormous it breaks through every wall she ever built. She pressed her hand over her mouth. She didn't make a sound, but she was seen. Finally, completely seen. Marcus turned back to Ray one last time. "You built your little kingdom by making sure nobody in this room believed they had options." His voice was calm, every word placed like a stone. "That's over now." Ray looked around the room for an ally. He found none. The agriculture inspector gestured toward the door. Ray walked out. Not in handcuffs, nothing so dramatic. He just walked, because there was nothing left to say and no one left to say it to. The room exhaled. Then Marcus turned fully to Delia. "I didn't come to Calvary looking for you," he said. "I came to evaluate a diner. But your business plan, the one you work on between midnight and 2 in the morning, is one of the most thoughtful small restaurant proposals I've seen in 30 years. He let that land. Devereaux Capital is funding the full build-out of your farm-to-table cafe, not as charity, as a $250,000 seed investment because the plan is sound and the person behind it is extraordinary. Delia stared at him. Her lips parted, but nothing came. "There's more," Marcus said. "I've established a partnership with Johnson & Wales University to reinstate your culinary scholarship. Part-time, structured around your schedule, so you can complete your degree while running your own kitchen." The front door opened. Caleb and Bree came through, led by Miss Pauline, still in her house slippers, still in her faded apron. Marcus had called her that morning. "Bring the children to Rosie's at 8. Their mother is going to need them." Bree saw Delia and ran. The beads in her braids clicked like tiny bells as she threw her arms around her mother's waist. Caleb was right behind her, steady, not running. But when he reached Delia, he pressed his face against her shoulder and held on. Delia dropped to her knees and pulled them both in. She was crying openly now, her cracked hands gripping her children like she was afraid they might disappear. Mr. Loomis rose from his booth, slowly, with the deliberate effort of a man whose body has slowed, but whose heart hasn't. He walked to Delia, put his large, trembling hand on her shoulder, and squeezed once. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Delia looked up at Marcus through her tears. "Why?" she whispered. "Why me? Why all of this?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough at the edges, the voice of a man saying something he had carried for 18 months. "Because my wife believed that the people who help others when no one's watching are the only people worth investing in." He swallowed. She was right. The diner erupted. Applause, real, unrestrained, the kind that comes from the chest. The same room that had watched Delia be humiliated, that had looked down at their coffee and said nothing, was now on its feet. For her, because of her. Delia held her children and closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. She had been strong her whole life, but this was the first time her strength had been answered. 8 months later, on a Saturday morning in early spring, Delia unlocked the front door of her restaurant for the first time. Marsh and Time. The name was painted on the window in hand-lettered gold. The storefront, the one Marcus had noticed on that first drive down Main Street, had been gutted and rebuilt from the studs out. New kitchen, open floor plan, 30 seats, wide windows that let in the Georgia morning light. On the wall beside the register hung a framed piece of art drawn in colored pencil by a 7-year-old, herbs and vegetables, and a smiling sun, with spring menu written in wobbly letters across the top. Bree's art, the first thing every customer would see. The produce came from 3 farms within 40 miles. The Kids Eat Free Sunday program was printed on the menu in bold. the first thing Delia insisted on. "Every child who walks in here eats," she'd told Marcus. "That's not negotiable." Opening night was packed. The whole town came. Mr. Loomis sat in the window seat, his seat. A small brass plate on the table read, "Reserved, Mr. Loomis," and when he saw it, his large hands trembled around his coffee mug and his eyes went bright, and he looked out the window at the street where he used to walk with Dorothy, and he nodded once, slowly, as if to say, "Yes, this is where I belong now." Caleb bussed tables after school, moving through the dining room with his mother's quiet efficiency, his clean sneakers squeaking on the new floor. In a back booth, his math homework sat next to a glass of sweet tea. Marcus and Joel attended the opening. Joel checked his Apple Watch twice out of habit, then stopped and just watched. Marcus hung back by the door, arms folded, and when Delia caught his eye across the room, he gave her a small nod. That was enough. That had always been their language. In the kitchen, Delia moved through the dinner rush like she'd been born there. White chef's coat, her name embroidered in navy thread above the pocket, the thin gold chain at her throat. Her hands, still cracked, still dry, moving with the authority of someone who had earned every inch of this room. After the rush, Mr. Loomis caught her by the kitchen door. His voice was low and careful, the way he always spoke, like every word was precious and he didn't want to waste one. "Your mama would be proud, Delia." Delia's hand went to the gold chain at her throat. She held it for a moment. "She's the one who taught me that feeding people is how you tell them they matter." The cafe hummed around them. Conversation, laughter, the clink of glasses, the warmth of a room full of people being fed by someone who meant it. Delia wiped her hands on her apron and walked back into her kitchen, her name on the wall, her dream, alive and breathing. 1 month after Marsh and Time opened its doors, Rosie's Grill closed its. The health department investigation had been thorough and final. Bacterial contamination confirmed across multiple product lines. Fraudulent packaging documented with supplier invoices. 3 years of payroll violations laid bare in records so meticulous they read like a confession. The state shut down the kitchen, tagged the equipment for auction, and padlocked the front door. But the damage didn't stop at the diner. A reporter from the Valdosta Daily Times, following up on the agriculture inspector's report, pulled the county board's complaint records and found what Delia had always known. Her 2 health complaints weren't the only ones that had disappeared. There were 4 in total, spanning 6 years, all buried by Ray's brother-in-law. The story ran on a Tuesday. By Thursday, he had resigned. Ray's attorney dropped his case. The counter-defamation suit filed by Devereaux Capital's legal team was proceeding. His wife packed 2 suitcases and drove to her sister's house in Valdosta without leaving a note. And on a gray afternoon in late fall, Ray Eustace stood alone inside the emptied-out shell of Rosie's Grill. The fluorescent lights were off. The booths had been pulled out, leaving pale rectangles on the floor where they'd sat for 20 years. The counter where he'd leaned every morning, arms crossed, class ring catching the light, watching his kingdom with the satisfaction of a man who believed he'd built something, was bare. Dust hung in the air. The fryer was cold. The only thing left on the wall was a closed sign that the health inspector had taped to the inside of the front door, and Ray stood there staring at it the way a man stares at something he cannot make real in his mind. He had never believed this door would close. Not for him. He had a brother-in-law on the county board. He had a town with no options. He had 30 years of everyone looking down at their coffee when he raised his voice. But the walls of his kingdom had never been made of brick. They were made of silence. And when the silence broke, there was nothing underneath. He twisted the class ring on his finger. The room offered no answer. 300 miles north, in a private event space in Atlanta's Buckhead district, Marcus Devereaux stood at a podium. Joel was beside him, not checking his Apple Watch for once, but standing still, hands clasped, watching his best friend come back to life. Marcus announced the creation of the Elena Devereaux Foundation. $5 million, dedicated to micro grants and business mentorship for working-class women in rural communities, women with viable plans and no access to capital, women like the one who had changed his life with 6 words on a folded piece of paper. Elena always told me that money is only as good as the person you trust it to, Marcus said. His voice was steady, but his eyes were bright. I finally understand what she meant. After the applause, after the handshakes and the photographs, Marcus sat alone at a table and opened a leather portfolio. Inside was the Foundation's inaugural advisory board list. He picked up a pen and wrote the first name himself in careful handwriting. Delia Marsh. 1 year later, a woman in a Johnson & Wales polo shirt walked into Marsh and Time on a Saturday evening with a camera bag over her shoulder and stopped in the doorway. The cafe was full. Every table occupied, conversation layered over the clink of silverware, the warm smell of rosemary and roasted root vegetables drifting from the kitchen. Caleb, 12 now, tall and confident, moved between tables clearing plates, pausing to joke with a regular before sliding into a back booth where his math textbook sat open next to a glass of sweet tea. Bree's newest artwork hung by the register, a spring illustration of bright flowers and fat bumblebees, the word April, written in letters that were getting steadier every season. Mr. Loomis sat in the window seat, his seat. He was eating the Tuesday special and watching the street outside with the quiet contentment of a man who had lost his companion, but found in this place a reason to keep showing up. The brass plate on his table caught the light. In the kitchen, Delia Marsh was running the line. She moved through the Saturday rush with calm authority, calling orders, plating dishes, adjusting seasoning with hands that now bore the burns and calluses of a chef. White coat, her name embroidered above the pocket, the thin gold chain at her throat. She was taking her Johnson & Wales coursework online, attending lectures after the kids fell asleep, the same midnight hours she'd once spent sketching dreams in a book she was afraid to show anyone. The recruiter introduced herself. She was photographing the cafe for the alumni magazine. Delia wiped her hands on a towel and led her through the kitchen. The recruiter snapped photos of the line, the prep station, the specials board. Then she paused. On the wall behind the kitchen pass, framed in simple pine, hung a small piece of paper. 6 words in careful handwriting. Please don't eat the steak. Trust me. What's that about? The recruiter asked. Delia looked at the note. She smiled, not the polite smile of someone answering a question, but the deep, private smile of someone remembering the exact moment their life split into before and after. Long story, she said, and went back to work. The dining room hummed. Caleb laughed at something a regular said. Bree's bumblebees smiled from the wall. Mr. Loomis sipped his coffee by the window, and in the kitchen, Delia plated another dish with hands that had carried everything: grief, fear, sacrifice, a business plan no one was supposed to see, and set it on the pass for a town that had finally learned what she was worth. Here's the thing about Delia Marsh. Her life didn't change because a millionaire walked into a diner. It changed because, long before he did, she had already decided what kind of person she was, even when no one was watching, even when it cost her everything, even when the only dream she had left fit inside a sketchbook she was afraid to open. Sometimes the universe sends someone to the right place at the right time, just to make sure that kind of person doesn't go unnoticed forever. And if this story reminded you that who you are when no one's watching is exactly who you are, share it with someone who needs to hear that today.